I'm excited to welcome our next speaker, Bret Taylor. As President and Chief Operating Officer, Bret Taylor leads Salesforce's global product vision, engineering, security, marketing, and communications. A respected software engineer and executive with an impressive history of building widely used and loved products, Bret was most recently the co-founder and CEO of Quip, the innovative collaboration platform Sales acquired in 2016. Prior to founding Quip, Bret served as the Chief Technology Officer of Facebook and saw the company through its successful IPO in 2012. Credited with the invention of the like button, Bret joined Facebook in 2009 after it acquired his social networking company, FriendFeed. Prior to FriendFeed, Bret started his career at Google, where he was the co-creator of Google Maps. Bret is a member of Twitter's board of directors, and he graduated from Stanford University in 2003 with a bachelor's and master's in computer science and now lives in the Bay Area. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today, Bret. Always exciting to chat with you and excited to talk to you about AI and enterprises.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so, Salesforce has been a real leader in AI for enterprises and deploying AI in a bunch of different enterprise applications. It's obviously been great to watch the success of Einstein across all of your different business units and the businesses that you serve. So maybe just to get us started and to kind of take a big step back, how did you first realize that AI was going to be an essential technology for enterprises?
Well, especially post-pandemic, there's so much talk about digital transformation. And I think it's because right now, if you don't have a digital business, you don't have a business, right? It's the only way to engage with your employees, your partners, your customers, your supply chain. And I think every digital transformation is also a data transformation because the byproduct of every digital interaction is more data. And the more data you can inform those digital interactions, the more intelligent and personalized they can be. So when you think about Salesforce does, we do digital sales, digital customer service, digital marketing, digital commerce. In every single one of those areas, as the interactions get more and more digital and sales meetings move from conference rooms to Zooms and contact centers that used to be buildings are now just things in the cloud, right? All of that provides more data and more opportunity to use AI to personalize those experiences, to make a better customer experience, to make a better employee experience. And just as an interesting example, unfortunately, there's a big surge in unemployment at the beginning of this pandemic, and we have a lot of public sector customers, including the New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions. They got this overwhelming demand for people, calling up for unemployment insurance. They deployed chatbots, started doing about 7,500 chatbot conversations per day. People able to solve their problems, get the unemployment solutions they needed, and they didn't overwhelm their contact center. And that's just one example, but I think across our entire Customer 360 platform, AI is central to everything that we do.
Yeah, and this is a good segue because I think right now we're at a point where every enterprise needs to develop an AI strategy. The technology is it's so important. It enables incredible things within a business. And so, whether you're a startup, a multinational enterprise like Salesforce, or sort of an established company that's been in business for hundreds of years, it's really important to develop an AI strategy to sort of stay ahead. Can you share? I'm sure that Salesforce is a trusted advisor to many organizations, as well as you guys have developed your own AI strategy. What's some advice on building an AI strategy, and how does that stack up or prioritize against other goals within the business?
Yeah, I agree with your premise. Every company needs to become an AI company. And it's an imperative in the all digital work anywhere economy. Our experiences are going to be driven by these digital experiences. And if your competitors provide more personalized, more automated experience, they'll have a better experience. So I agree with the premise. The scary statistic, there was a 2021 Gartner CIO survey that you've probably seen. So 94% of the CIOs who responded say they're working on AI projects. Only 24% of those CIOs had actually deployed one successfully. We are sort of in the peak of this hype cycle around AI. And I would argue a lot of companies haven't actually seen the value they've hoped from some of those projects. And it's admittedly somewhat biased because of what we do at Salesforce, but my philosophy is don't start with the technology, start with your customers. Whoever the customer is, start with their experience and what you're trying to build. Don't build technology for technology's sake. And when you do that and you start with the customer and you start with the principal sort of jobs to be done, like what are you doing with this technology, it can really clarify the scope of these technology projects and help you find more success. And the other thing I would say is that, when I think about making AI more accessible is, find the easy wins. One of the things that sets Einstein, which is our AI platform, apart is we're not building general purpose AI platforms like you are at scale. We're building technology you can turn on with clicks, not code, and I think there's a lot of hidden value in that. I mean, just as an example, we obviously integrate AI into our marketing cloud, which sends a lot of email and text messages and push notifications. And one of our customers, Orvis, was able to turn this on, to sort of judge the engagement of the messages they sent out before they sent them out. And they increased their click-through rates by 22%. They increased their traffic by 30%. And it wasn't a really complex, project. It was really just taking advantage of the tools embedded in these platforms. And, thanks to companies like Scale, I think a lot of these software as a service tools are building intelligent capabilities into the products. And I'm hopeful that that's a path for a lot of companies to get value from AI without becoming AI shops, which is a really formidable challenge for a lot of companies that aren't native software companies right now.
Yeah. So there's exists a path. It isn't an all or nothing. Hey, I have zero AI strategy, or I have a team that's dedicated to building AI technology. There's this middle path, which is I can work with partners that I've worked with for years and years, and utilize some of the digital and AI technology that they bring to bear. One thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm curious. You touched on this a little bit. You mentioned this use case around the Marketing Cloud, and you mentioned chatbots a little bit ago. What are some of these use cases of AI that you've just seen tangible value amongst Salesforce's customers, or just broadly within the enterprise? And what are some of these that you encourage folks to be thinking more about?
Yeah, well, first, it's across the entire portfolio, because I said if it's a digital experience, it should be able to benefit from AI. And, when I look at Sales Cloud, one of the great examples of this is sales call coaching. And, using essentially the ability to sort of find mentions of competitors and calls, it gives sales managers the opportunity to, at scale, provide coaching about, how to make your sales teams more effective, which is, especially as we're all effectively working from home with our headsets on, it's an amazing opportunity to drive sales performance. In our Service Cloud, it sort of goes without saying, how relevant things like chatbots are. But one of my favorite examples is we have a product called Service Cloud Voice, which is a contact center product. And when you're on the phone with the customers having a problem, Einstein is transcribing what they're saying and suggesting the answer to their questions, which is really neat because when you're on a support call, what you want to do is get answered and get off the support call, both as the customer and as the company providing the support. And it's an amazing way of making service agents better, more productive, getting to that time to resolution, faster than ever before. And in our B2C products like Marketing Cloud and Commerce Cloud, it's all about personalization. And I think the bar has been set by digitally native companies like the Amazons of the world and the Googles of the world and the Apples of the world. And, I think really what the promise of this is you can have the same degree of personalization that those really sophisticated technology companies have. And as I said, our aspiration, we don't always meet it, but our aspiration is you can just turn it on. And I think the most interesting thing, though, and I think when I see, scale customers, working with us too, is the intersection between, companies building proprietary models and systems and integrating them with some software as a service. And I think we're still in the early innings of that. We have customers building custom models to predict attrition and integrating that with Sales Cloud. I still think we're sort of figuring out that future, but I see a ton of potential because as every company develops more sophisticated data science capabilities and they're adopting more software as a service, I think there's a really great future opportunities to say, how do these things all work together in a more seamless way?
Yeah, no, the the ingredients are all there, right? Like the ingredients are, okay, do you have systems that are creating large pools of digital data? Thankfully, Salesforce, among others, as software as a service providers, have really created the preconditions for that to be the case. And it's huge. You know, these a lot of enterprises, just as a byproduct of using products like Salesforce, now have access to incredibly valuable data within their business. Then it's like, okay, are there more and more people with machine learning expertise coming out? Is there more compute available? Now there's data availability, and you can combine all these together to produce just incredible applications within the business, some of which are some of the most important problems that enterprises struggle with in the first place, which, as you mentioned, which is like, hey, how do you enable better, more personalized experiences for your customers? That's like a structural cross-cutting issue. You know, one thing I'm curious about, as you've seen it, like, you know, there's sort of like a few kinds of different problems that AI can be used to solve for these enterprises. You know, there's customer-facing problems, and that can be, one is, you know, I would almost split it up between maybe personalization as one aspect, but also enabling new customer experiences, like chatbots, for example, or better voice assistant capability, et cetera. And then there's back office use cases. You know, there's process optimization. There's making things work more efficiently internally. Where, like, you know, you all have seen a breadth of use cases. Where do you think it's most valuable for most enterprises to focus?
You know, obviously every business is different, you know, so if I was talking to any company with a large supply chain right now, that's probably the top thing on their mind because of all the supply chain disruption, and being more agile and intelligent around supply chain optimization could be the most important thing. However, what I would say is right now, the focus of almost every CEO and every board that I talk to is growth. You know, we just went through a major economic disruption with this pandemic. I think everyone's coming to the realization that this is not going to snap back. We're in a new pandemic world, an all digital work anywhere world. And companies are really saying, how do we find our way back to growth in that new world? And fundamentally, that means building a new digital employee experience, a digital partner experience, and a digital customer experience. And I think, you know, disproportionately, and maybe it's our vantage point in the enterprise software market, but disproportionately that's around customer experience. And because it can be the things that really change the top line growth trajectory of a company, which is, you know, for most CEOs, that's a pretty compelling area to focus on. And what I would say is this pandemic has really accelerated the change in expectations in consumers. You know, prior to this pandemic, I had never shopped for groceries online. I'm more of the go in the grocery store and smell the fruit type of person. Now I have a subscription to toilet paper. You know, it's like these things aren't going back, right? Like we've learned these experiences, and we don't talk about Black Friday and Cyber Monday anymore. We just say Cyber Week. And no matter how many retail stores reopen, the e-commerce is not going to go down next year, right? We've learned these habits. And so I think focusing on the customer experience is probably the right place to start, and the right place to just get value from AI fast. The thing I would say, though, is, you know, going back to our first conversation, doing it in a way that's ethical, doing it in a way that's accessible is really challenging. So, but I think it's worth it because every company needs to build intelligence into their business strategy.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think, you know, from my experience speaking with enterprises, that I think is a question or a struggle is like, what's the right investment model, right? Like in the sense that it's great if there's cases where you can turn it on in some existing solution like Salesforce, and that's great, obviously. But in starting these AI programs or investing into AI programs, you know, you're right. We have been in a phase where like a lot of experiments have failed, which creates it, you know, kind of causes it to be a tricky thing to feel good about continuing to invest a lot of resources into. At the same time, the potential upside and the sort of like the value of getting AI working in your business is so great. So how do you think about the right kind of investment framework or philosophy around investing in the business case of AI within the enterprise?
I think the main thing is to understand why you're building what you're building. And, you know, I say always start with the customer, whether it's an internal customer or external. Know the impact you're going for. And if you have a clear business case, you have clear business value, and the funding becomes obvious. You know, when I think about, for example, are Einstein built into Commerce Cloud. The measure is really clear for our customers. They want more gross merchandising volume running through their system, and Icebreaker, which is an outdoor apparel company, when they turned it on, they basically saw recommendations clicked on 40% more often and 28% more revenue from recommended products. Very easy to measure, right? Unfortunately, not all projects have like a dollar sign on the other end like that. But if you spend a lot of time recognizing like what the business value is you're trying to achieve, it becomes really easy to fund it, because like once the project succeeds, here's the impact it can have on either cost savings or top line growth. And it can be a really clarifying thing so the project doesn't get away from you. And I've just seen a lot of people, where the AI becomes the purpose of the project and you end up with sort of a bottomless pit of investment, and also a really unclear definition of success and a definition of done. And I think that's what smart CTOs and smart CIOs are being very opinionated about. Here's the outcomes we're trying to deliver.
And what are so we talked a little about the talent hurdles. We mentioned a little bit that like getting data in the right places is critical for these enterprises. Like what's almost like what are the top recommendations? Let's say you're a CEO of an enterprise and you take this recommendation. Hey, we're gonna like be focused on what end metrics are we trying to affect with AI? What is like almost the checklist or the key fundamentals to get in place before being able to build great, to even get started on the problem?
One of the things that I believe in is being practical. And I've met a lot of executives who, there's a little bit of the science fiction view of AI, and it's like you turn it on and, everything just works in an automated way. I think there's so many short-term opportunities to just make all of us as employees more productive with a little help from AI. I'll give you a really funny example of this. So we have a capability in our Sales Cloud called Einstein forecasting, and essentially helps you predict how many sales you're closing the quarter. When we run our sales forecast call, we have the roll up from our sales leaders, and they say, here's what we think we're going to hit this quarter based on our opportunities and the pipeline, and we have Einstein's number right next to it. So it's like, here's the sales leader's number and here's Einstein's number. So one time Einstein thought that one of our sales leaders was going to miss his number, and he was furious. He's like, Einstein doesn't know what he's talking about. And it turns out he was right. What was really going on is there was a data problem. So some of his sales reps weren't properly updating Salesforce when in some of their after some of their customer calls. Qualitatively, he knew that some of those deals were more likely to close, but the data wasn't reflected in Salesforce. And what was interesting about it, though, is that sales executive became the strongest advocate for Einstein, because even though Einstein had an incorrect prediction, it actually helped him fix an operational problem on his team. People weren't actually updating the single source of truth that was Salesforce. And he said, look, if the data is not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist, and he actually created new rigor on his team to make sure the data was already up to date. And he tells that story now to our customers, talking about how this actually helped him uncover systemic human issues on his team, even though the prediction was incorrect. And I bring that up just because I do think it's a vision for how much we can use intelligence, even if it's imperfect, to help us become more effective as organizations. And so I would just say that, you don't need science fiction to get value from AI. And I think that's when you scale it back and you say, what wins can we generate right now? Often there's a lot of relatively low-hanging fruit right in front of you.
Yeah. No, I've noticed in general, you've really been quite focused on like, hey, there's low-hanging fruit that exists within the business, or there's a lot of like short-term value propositions that exist from implementing AI. On a slightly longer time horizon, what do you think the sort of like enterprise of the future, like let's think an optimal enterprise for the future, what does that look like? What does AI actually enable for that business, let's say 5 or 10 years out?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity I see is, really getting better about predictive intelligence. I think that when we get to a point where these systems of record at your company can actually tell you things you didn't foresee, I think it'll really change your relationship with the software that you're using. I think that especially with, Tableau and Einstein and some of the investments we've made here, we're still relying a lot on, the analysts and executives sort of saying, here's the prediction we want to make. And I do think that, as systems get more intelligent and can understand more of the context of your business automatically, I think there's an amazing opportunity to look around corners that executive teams and boardrooms didn't necessarily know to look around. And I think that can be a really powerful thing for businesses. And I think there's pockets of this today in kind of specialized verticals, but I do think there's an opportunity to really generalize this. And I think it will make executive teams look stronger than they ever were, right? Because it's essentially, making your accountability and predictability of your business even greater.
Yeah, awesome. I want to go back to like something that you had mentioned before, which is, you had this, you're very grateful that you had sort of started your career at Google, and so you sort of were steeped in this almost like data-centric, algorithmically centric, scalability-centric culture. What do you think are the core tenets of that? Like, what are the reflections or the sort of principles of a data-driven culture versus one that isn't? And what is that? And how would you start to instill that within an organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the phrase data culture. It's actually probably the key tenet of Tableau, which is our data analytics product, is to create data cultures and help everyone at your organization see and understand data. I think that word culture is the most important thing. As much as I advocated for people having a chief data officer, if data and intelligence is in a department at your company and doesn't break out of that department, you're not really a data culture. What a data culture means is that everyone is making data-informed decisions, and their decisions aren't made on their gut instinct. They're not based on who the highest paid person in the room is. It's based on actual data and, objective view of your customers, of your supply chain, of your employees. And I think a big part of that, one of the principles, is recognizing it's a cultural shift and figuring out, where you're making decisions, and, data isn't the starting point. And a lot of that is change management and operational more than it's technical. The second thing is the tools you give your employees. One of the reasons we were so excited to acquire Tableau is just how much it was focused on empowerment. It's about as easy to use as Microsoft Excel, but it's a super powerful tool. And it meant that, being an analyst, wasn't the domain of experts, it was a domain of everybody. And I think that's a really important next step for AI and creating these data cultures, is making sure that these systems aren't so rigid, that there's a data scientist in some building over here making all the data decisions for your company. How do you actually distribute that accountability and distribute that and make it empowering for everyone at your organization? And I think naturally, companies with data cultures will win. And so I think I know in a decade, most companies will have data cultures, because in a decade, the companies that created them will have outgrown their competitors.
Yeah. And when you mentioned data, you touched on one important aspect, which is using data to drive human decision making within the company. And then there's kind of this next level of almost what I would call like the algorithmic data culture, the AI inspired data culture, where hey, the culture is that you are stewards of data within your business that are then fed into algorithms, and those algorithms then also make decisions in your business. And so it's you're removing people from this sort of like decision making process. How do you think about enabling that as much as possible within an enterprise? How do you think about that transition for most enterprises to move from a predominantly human intuition based decision making culture to one where you're trusting algorithms to make a lot of decisions within the business?
Yeah, automation is the top priority of every CIO and CTO I talk to. And it's in part because if you look around most enterprises right now, there are so many areas where people are copy and pasting between tools, using spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations to do things that could be entirely automated. And actually, I'll just give you a really interesting example from our own business. We have a customer experience team We do over 10,000 surveys a year just to kind of measure the sentiment of our customers. It used to take, as you can imagine, like 15 hours to comb through like thousands of surveys. We now do almost all of this in an automated way, and essentially doing sentiment analysis and other things so that our team can actually scale up the number of surveys we're sending and get more value from it by just removing almost all manual processes from the loop. And I do think, as you described, it's kind of the next level of applying data and intelligence. I think both matter a lot. I think there are things that should be completely automated, and I also think that AI, machine learning, analytics can help all the decision makers at your company have better intuition as well. And I think it's probably incorrect to think about it as one or the other. I think both go together when you're thinking about creating a data culture.
I think to kind of go back to it, I think part in building AI into a lot of businesses, definitely one vector that is on a lot of CEOs' minds is, okay, we want to use AI to reignite growth. In many ways, that's going to be through enabling new user experiences, right? And this is something that traditionally internet tech companies, this was like the key thing that they were able to do, is like innovate very quickly on new user experiences that then drove greater engagement or drove greater commerce, et cetera. What recommendations would you make, just given your own experience literally building a number of user experiences that are critical to the average person's life today, whether that be Google Maps or at Facebook or Gmail or whatnot? Like, what is your advice to enterprises who want to be innovating on how they interact with their customers and what end user experiences they enable, while still staying true to their sort of core brand identity?
Well, it's going to sound funny, but if you want to build a better customer experience, focus on your customers. And what's interesting about it is a lot of companies talk about customer experience, but if you look away, they're organized. They're organized around their products. They're organized by their regions. How many times have you had an experience where you have maybe a conglomerate that's done a number of acquisitions and they don't have a single view of you as their customer? The right hand's not talking to the left hand. I think the most important transformation that every company in the world needs to make is organize themselves around their customers. Whether it's a bank and maybe you have a bank account over here and an investment banking relationship over here, maybe you've started a small business and gotten a loan. You want a single view of you, Alex, as the banking customer, right? And most companies just miss on that. And we have this idea at Salesforce called Customer 360, and it's really about saying, can you have a single view of your customer across those touch points? The basis of that is having a single source of truth about your customer data. And if you have that, building automated and intelligent experiences on top of that is available to you. If you don't, and your data is siloed, you don't. And that's the blunt truth. And I actually think that it all starts with the data, and it all starts with, are you actually putting your customer at the center of your business, or are you shipping your org chart? And I think it's one of the biggest challenges most companies face, and a huge opportunity for customer-centric companies.
Yeah, and this is something that we see all the time with our customers, right? Is that our whole thesis is that data is the foundation of being able to build any sort of reasonable AI strategy. And the exact point that you mentioned, data is siloed within most enterprises, and pieces of data that are very relevant to any sort of application or intelligent experience that you'd want to build on top of it, they're split out based on the org chart. I think what you just mentioned is a great soundbite. We've been talking through all sorts of different applications of AI within enterprises. In many ways, these are very tangible applications. They don't necessarily mirror the sexy things that you see on the internet about all the various ways that AI is painting paintings or changing, folding proteins or whatnot, and all these like innovative new applications. But one implicit thing that I think you and I can both agree on is, the time, and the question is, if you agree with this, the time to invest is now. The time to be investing into what your business will look like in an AI-enhanced way is now, and you shouldn't be waiting for some magical discovery in the future.
I agree. It's interesting. There's great phrase, I think often credited to Bill Gates, which is we often overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in a decade. And I think that particularly when you have technologies like deep learning and other forms of machine learning that are accelerating at such an exponential pace, a decade from now, I can assure you, a lot of these sort of science fiction ideas will be a reality, at least a meaningful subset of them. But if you're not making those foundational investments now, creating a data culture at your company, building a digital customer experience, building a single source of truth, breaking down those data silos, now you'll be caught flat-footed once the technologies are actually a reality. And if you need any proof of that, look at the companies that went into 2020 and the pandemic, and how you felt when the companies that had invested in digital technologies, at least had a business then, and the companies that were building on the fly lost, 6 months of business. And I think that, this transformation of our economy to turn digital is accelerating. And really, I think there's no shortage of the investment a smart management team should make in digital customer experiences, AI and intelligence and personalization to set themselves up to grow in that all digital work anywhere world.
Yeah. And then maybe one last question is, like, I think you have a unique view. You've seen, as you mentioned, you were in sort of the period of great optimism of technology where, hey, technology is just purely making everything better. And then as many of these technology platforms scaled up, we saw what happened when, the potential unintended consequences of that technology. What call to action or what recommendation would you give to people developing AI technology, many of whom are attending the conference today, in really ensuring that we have a positive future of AI, that there aren't as many unintended consequences as there could be if we weren't focused on it?
Well, I think the first thing to recognize is that technology is not inherently good or bad, it's how you use it. And I think the days of assuming any technological advancement is purely good is, I think, rightfully being characterized as naive. And it's interesting, I think that in most other disciplines, ethics are a huge part of what you learn if you're becoming a physicist or a chemist, and you learn about the history of applications of those disciplines that didn't benefit humanity. And it's a big part of the discourse of new development. And I think with the headlines around technology, misinformation, bias embedded in machine learning models, whatever it may be, I think society is now holding software and artificial intelligence to a higher standard. And I think all of the technologists watching right now are developing AI, embrace that, embed conversations about ethics and trust into your development process. And it probably involves bringing stakeholders in who aren't just data scientists, who can be a part of the design process and look around the corner. I think the thing that is no longer accessible is, you didn't have the right person in the room, you created a technology that had a massively bad unintended consequence. Not having those people in the room is no longer an excuse, And so I think we really need to bring in more stakeholders into the technology design process, ethicists, sociologists, and others who can help us shape these technologies in a more responsible way. And I think that's going to really change the way we think about technology development. And I argue it will change it much more for the better.
Yeah. And maybe just a last message to kind of close. I think that for many enterprises, this journey of AI is going to be incredibly exciting, but one that's incredibly daunting, one with potentially many challenges. What would your advice be to just what should they keep in mind as they go on this sort of multi-year journey? How can they ensure that even with bumps in the road, that they'll ultimately end up in a state where the enterprise is AI imbued?
Well, I think the consumer expectations around customer experience now have permanently shifted. And so whether or not you want it, you're being compared to all the digitally native companies right now. And the answer is to build a customer 360 and apply AI to build personalized, more automated, faster, easier experiences for your customers. I think that what's really amazing about the digitization of the economy this past year is I think it's given permission to try bolder things, and from the boardroom on down, because if you don't have a digital business, you don't have a business. So don't let the crisis go to waste. Use the opportunity of this just seismic shift in expectations and technology, and use it as an opportunity to make a bold investment. And on the other side of it, I think you have the opportunity to gain market share, gain customer loyalty, gain employee loyalty, and right now there's never been a better opportunity to invest. Thanks for having me.